I need you to sit with this for 1 second. My son needed a doctor's professional medical opinion before he bothered driving 11 miles to see if his own mother was dying. Not a feeling, not instinct. A phone call. 71 hours passed before he showed up, carrying grocery store flowers with the price tag still on them. But here's what nobody in that hospital room knew yet. 6 weeks later, I would be sitting across my own kitchen table, calmly explaining to him exactly why his name no longer meant anything on a single piece of paper that mattered. My name is Barbara Evans. I'm 62 years old, and I spent 28 years as a registered nurse, the last 14 of them as a charge nurse in the cardiac care unit at Millbrook General Hospital, before I retired and opened a small medical billing consulting business out of my dining room. That's the credibility. Here's the part that still doesn't sit right in my chest. I had emergency triple bypass surgery on a Wednesday morning, and my own son didn't show up to see me until the hospital's cardiologist personally called him 3 days later. I want to tell you exactly what my son, Kevin, said when Dr. Whitfield finally reached him on the phone, because a nurse on my floor overheard it and told me every word later. Kevin apparently said, "Is she actually in danger, or is this just like a precaution thing?" As if his own mother's open heart surgery was an inconvenience he needed graded on a scale before deciding whether it warranted his time. 3 days, 71 hours in a hospital bed with tubes in my chest, and my only son needed a doctor's professional opinion before he bothered driving me 11 miles from his house to mine. But here's what Kevin didn't know yet. Lying in that ICU bed hooked up to monitors. For months earlier, at my annual estate review with my attorney, I had already restructured my modest retirement accounts and the small rental property I owned on Fairview Street into a trust with very particular language in it. And 6 weeks after that hospital stay, Kevin would be sitting across from me at my kitchen table, asking why he'd been removed as my healthcare proxy, while I calmly explained a decision that had nothing to do with punishment and everything to do with who actually shows up. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all really started. If you're watching this tonight and something about it already feels a little too close to home, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now for you. I read every single comment. I grew up in Millbrook, Ohio, an only child raised by a single mother named Ruth, who worked double shifts at a textile mill on Fenwick Road to keep food on our table after my father left when I was 4 years old. I remember specific winters where my mother came home smelling of dye and machine oil, too exhausted to do more than heat up canned soup, yet she never once complained where I could hear it. She never remarried, poured everything she had into raising me alone, and taught me, mostly by example rather than lecture, that showing up for people was the entire measure of love. Nothing else counted nearly as much, not gifts, not apologies, not good intentions. I became a nurse in 1986 partly because of her example, partly because I wanted a life where showing up for people who needed me was literally my job description written into the contract. I married a good man named Dale Evans in 1985, a high school shop teacher with an easy laugh and endless patience, the kind of man who fixed neighbors' fences on weekends without being asked. We had one son together, Kevin, born in 1990. Dale passed away suddenly from a stroke in the fall of 2016. On a Thursday evening at 9:10 p.m., while watching a basketball game in our living room, the television still playing when the paramedics arrived 12 minutes later. He was 59 years old. I was 52, and I went back to work at the hospital exactly 9 days after the funeral because staying home with the silence felt worse than 12-hour shifts on the cardiac floor, surrounded by other people's emergencies instead of my own grief. Kevin was 26 when his father died, already married to a woman named Ashley, already living his own life 11 miles across town in a rental duplex near the community college where Ashley taught part-time. I understood that grief affects people differently, and I never expected him to grieve the way I did, sitting up some nights going through Dale's old toolboxes just to feel close to him. But over the years that followed, a pattern set in that I mostly excused, the way mothers excuse things when they'd rather believe the best. Kevin missing Thanksgiving twice for Ashley's family instead, Kevin forgetting my birthday 2 years running, once realizing 3 days late and sending a text that just said, "OMG, sorry, happy belated," Kevin showing up late or not at all to the small things that add up over time into a larger, quieter kind of absence you can't quite point to any single moment and call unforgivable, but that accumulates anyway. My younger cousin's daughter, Lily, who I'd more or less helped raise summers while her own mother worked night shifts at the same textile mill my mother once had, called me every single Sunday without fail, drove up from Columbus once a month just to have lunch with me at the diner on Fenwick Road, and remembered small details about my life, my physical therapy schedule, my favorite tea, the anniversary of Dale's passing, that Kevin, frankly, didn't bother to ask about anymore. The chest pain started on a Tuesday morning in March at 6:50 a.m. While I was making coffee in my kitchen, a dull pressure spreading across my chest and into my left arm that I recognized instantly and clinically, the way you recognize a fire alarm even half asleep. I recognized the symptoms immediately. 28 years of cardiac nursing does that for you. Drills the signs so deep into your instincts that panic doesn't get the first word, and drove myself to the emergency room at Millbrook General rather than waiting for an ambulance, which in hindsight was probably not my wisest professional decision, but old habits from a career of taking care of everyone else die hard. The triage nurse who took my vitals that morning, a young woman named Priya, who I'd trained myself 6 years earlier, recognized me instantly and had me back in a bed within 4 minutes flat. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, the cardiologist on call that morning, reviewed my angiogram results by 9 a.m. and told me, plainly and without exaggeration, that if I'd waited even another hour before coming in, we'd be telling a very different story tonight, that 2 of my 3 affected arteries were blocked severely enough to be genuinely life-threatening. Triple bypass surgery was scheduled for that same afternoon, at 1 p.m., giving me barely enough time to process what was happening. Before I was being wheeled into an operating room I had walked past 1,000 times as staff, but never once entered as a patient. I called Kevin from the emergency room myself at 8:15 a.m., sitting upright in a hospital gown with N4 already taped to my hand, and told him exactly what was happening in plain medical terms, because that's how I communicate and because I genuinely believe my son would drop everything and come the moment he understood the severity. He said, "Oh no, Mom. That's terrible, keep me posted," and hung up after 90 seconds to, as he mentioned briefly before ending the call, handle something at work first. That was the last I heard from him directly for 3 days, 71 hours of silence from the one person whose voice I most expected to hear in that hospital room. If any part of this is landing close to home for you, go ahead and drop a comment. I read every single one. I came out of surgery that Tuesday afternoon groggy, in pain, hooked to more monitors than I'd ever personally attached to a patient in my career, and Lily was there within 4 hours, having driven up from Columbus the moment she got my text, sitting in the chair beside my bed reading a paperback, so I wouldn't wake up alone. The fluorescent lights dimmed low the way I'd instructed nurses to keep them for post-surgical patients 1,000 times myself. Kevin sent one text message that first night. "Hope surgery went okay. Let me know," the kind of message you'd send an acquaintance, not your own mother recovering from having her chest opened and her heart operated on directly. The next 2 days blurred together the way hospital stays do when you're the patient instead of the nurse. Vitals checks every 4 hours, a physical therapist getting me to sit up in a chair on day 2. The particular exhaustion of healing from the inside out. Lily brought me a small houseplant from the gift shop on the second day. The kind of thoughtful, unnecessary gesture that told me more about her heart than any grand statement could have. She sat through 2 of my physical therapy sessions, taking notes on my recovery instructions, because she said, plainly, someone needs to remember this stuff since you're the one who usually remembers everything for everyone else. By Thursday, Dr. Whitfield, a professional man who had clearly noticed the empty chair in my room where a grown son should have been sitting, took it upon himself to call Kevin directly, using the emergency contact number still listed in my chart from years earlier. He told me afterward, with the careful diplomacy doctors use with patients they respect, that he felt it was medically relevant for immediate family to understand the gravity of a triple bypass recovery. The 6-week window where complications are most likely the restrictions on lifting and driving that someone would need to help me manage. That's when Kevin apparently asked whether this was actually dangerous, as though my own cardiologist would call a stranger's grown child over a minor inconvenience rather than a genuine medical concern. Kevin showed up that evening, 3 days after my surgery, standing awkwardly in the doorway of my hospital room, like he wasn't sure he was allowed in anymore, holding a bouquet of grocery store carnations still wrapped in plastic, the price stickers still visible on the cellophane. I didn't yell at him. I want to be very clear about that, because so many people expect confrontation in a moment like that, and I simply didn't have the energy for it. Wired to monitors with a healing sternum and a chest full of stitches, I said calmly, "Thank you for coming, Kevin," and let the silence between us say the rest of what needed saying. He sat in the chair Lily had occupied for 3 straight days, and I watched him check his phone twice in the first 10 minutes, then apologize for it, then check it again anyway 10 minutes after that. I was released from the hospital 8 days after surgery, and I spent the 6 weeks of my cardiac rehabilitation almost entirely in Lily's care. She took 2 weeks off from her job managing a dental office in Columbus to stay with me in my guest room, drove me to every single physical therapy appointment at the rehabilitation center on Route 9, learned my medication schedule better than I remembered it myself some groggy mornings, and never once made me feel like a burden for needing help after 28 years of being the one who provided it to everyone else on my cardiac floor. She cooked low-sodium meals from a binder of recipes she'd printed out the week I came home, labeled each container in the refrigerator by day, and sat with me during the hardest nights when the incision pain kept me from sleeping. During those 6 weeks, I had a lot of quiet time to think, propped up in my recliner with nothing but daytime television and my own thoughts for company, my cardiac monitor app pinging reminders on my phone every few hours. I thought about my healthcare proxy paperwork, filled out 5 years earlier at a routine estate review, naming Kevin as the person legally responsible for my medical decisions if I couldn't make them myself. I thought about those 71 hours in the hospital, about a cardiologist having to personally intervene to get my own son to show up, about a folded, unread magazine on my nightstand that Kevin's flowers had been propped against for the rest of that first awkward visit. I called my attorney, a longtime family friend named Douglas Feinberg, and asked him to draft new paperwork, this time listing Lily as my primary healthcare proxy and my late husband's older sister, my sister-in-law Carol, as the backup. For weeks after that, I said nothing to Kevin about the changes. I kept a small folder in my desk drawer, the way I'd always kept careful charts throughout my nursing career. Dates, texts, the 90-second phone call transcript I remembered almost word for word. Not out of spite, but because 28 years of documentation habits don't just switch off in retirement. I noted the exact time stamp of his first and only text message during my hospital stay, sent at 11:47 p.m., the night of my surgery. I noted the date Dr. Whitfield called him, and roughly what Kevin had reportedly said in response. I filed it all, the way I'd filed patient charts for nearly 3 decades, not to punish anyone, but because clarity mattered more to me than comfort at that point in my recovery. 6 weeks after my surgery, Kevin came by for what he called a check-in, and found the new paperwork sitting on my kitchen table, since Douglas had mailed me a copy for my records that same week, and I hadn't yet put it away in the filing cabinet. He asked carefully, turning the papers over in his hands, why his name had been removed as my healthcare proxy and replaced with Lily's. I told him the truth plainly, the way I tell patients' families difficult truths after decades of practice. Healthcare proxies aren't symbolic titles, they're responsibilities, and someone who needs a doctor's personal phone call to understand the seriousness of his own mother's open-heart surgery isn't someone I can trust to make split-second medical decisions for me if I'm ever unable to make them myself. He didn't argue with me right away. He sat there at my kitchen table for a long moment, turning his own coffee mug slowly, and I watched something shift across his face. Not anger exactly, something closer to the shame of finally seeing yourself clearly in a mirror you'd been avoiding. He said, I didn't realize how bad it looked from the outside. I told him it wasn't about how it looked. It was about what it actually was. 3 days of silence while I lay in a hospital bed recovering from surgery that could have killed me, and a phone call from my own cardiologist that shouldn't have been necessary in the first place. He's been different since that conversation. I'll give him that much credit. He's called every week without fail for the past month and a half. Real conversations, not obligatory check-ins. He came to my last 2 cardiac rehab check-ins and sat through the appointments instead of checking his phone, asked the physical therapist real questions about my recovery timeline. Whether that lasts, I genuinely don't know yet, and I've decided I don't need to know yet either. Lily remains my healthcare proxy, and that paperwork stays exactly as Douglas drafted it, regardless of how many good weeks follow, because trust, in my experience, is rebuilt slowly on a timeline that isn't mine to rush. Here's what I want you to take away from tonight, in my own words, because 28 years of nursing taught me to say hard things plainly. Showing up isn't a bonus feature of love. It's the whole foundation of it, and anyone who needs a doctor's phone call to understand that your life was in danger has already told you everything you need to know about where you rank in theirs. You are allowed to change who holds your hardest decisions. You are allowed to let the people who actually showed up be the ones who matter most going forward, regardless of blood, regardless of what anyone expects a family tree to dictate about loyalty. I think about those 71 hours often now, not with bitterness anymore, but with a strange kind of gratitude. Oddly enough, my whole career, I stood at the bedsides of other families in crisis, watching who showed up and who didn't, quietly filing away lessons I never expected to need myself one day. It took my own chest being open for me to finally apply them to my own life, instead of just observing them in everyone else's. If this story meant something to you tonight, hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me which part hit hardest, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves out there.